let's talk about African wildcats. This is the African wildcat. It is a type of a very small wildcat that is native to most areas in Africa, but as well as a few in Asia as well, from Kazakhstan all the way over to Mongolia and down to China and a couple small areas in India. Now, you may be thinking, hey, that just looks like a regular old cat, you can't fool me, and that is for a very good reason. The African wildcats are the direct ancestors of all domestic cats that we have around today. A very long time ago, around 10,000 or so years in the Fertile Crescent, these guys were first domesticated. The Fertile Crescent includes a whole bunch of areas where these guys are native to, including Iraq, Iran, Jordan, and some areas of Turkey, among other places. Around approximately the same time, a little bit later, the African wildcats were also domesticated in ancient Egypt as well. Basically what happened all that time ago, ancient humans and ancient African wildcats formed a kind of symbiotic relationship. Humans had problems with pests in grain stores because this is also around the boom of agriculture that happened in the Fertile Crescent. And with large quantities of stored food comes large quantities of rodents, specifically things like mice and rats. And humans are not very good at keeping mice and rats out of grain stores, but you know what are? Cats. The African wildcats of the Fertile Crescent noticed very quickly that there were unfathomably large and healthy quantities of rodents around human settlements, and these rodents were slow and fat and very easy for these guys to catch, so the cats are basically like, oh fuck yeah, this is the best food source, and they moved into quite close proximity with the early humans. And of course these humans noticed that these cats were very, very good at keeping unwanted pests out of grain stores and also adorable, so they allowed the cats to continue doing what they were doing, and eventually the cats and the humans basically domesticated each other. Through generations and generations of selective breeding and domestication processes, these select populations of African wildcats in these areas and multiple other areas as well, because as the human populations grew, so did the African wildcat, which is now the domestic cat populations. They too grew, and they moved along with the humans into different settlements, and eventually we got to where we are today, with a bunch of different breeds and colorations and color patterns and sizes and temperaments and everything through selective breeding to get the domestic cat breeds where they are now. But what is interesting is the fact that we still have these kind of, I guess, wild type African wild cats around. Still, in the majority of their native range, that being large portions of Africa and Asia, there are African wildcats that are basically the exact same as the domestic cat wild ancestors were. Since the domestic cats are directly descended from the African wildcats, they have very similar genetics, close enough to actually be able to interbreed. Now, this is actually causing problems in the wild populations of the African wildcats. Since they not uncommonly hybridize with the domestic cats in the area, it's actually diluting the genuine African wildcat gene pool quite a bit. And normally, an increase in genetic diversity is usually a good thing, but in the case of these hybridizations, hybrids usually aren't that healthy and come with a myriad of health conditions. So, with a lot of the wild populations having at least a little bit of hybrid blood in them, it is decreasing the health and also natural wild instincts of many of these African wildcats. And also, I know what at least some of you are thinking and will probably be putting in the comments. These ones specifically, again despite what I just said, are not domestic cats. These are still very much wild animals and have not been domesticated in the same way that their ancient descendants all the way were. and that their modern descendants are now. They are still wild animals and do not make good house pets at all and should not be approached and are best left alone, even though they are directly ancestors of our modern house cats.